it's not about connecting to a deity or anything like that. For me, it's about connecting to life and participating in it. And it just keeps opening up in different ways. It's like you said, it just it never ends. This kind of
Yeah.
exploration through practice.
I'm glad I asked because I think the listeners, the viewers of this video are going to find your explanation a lot more cogent than what I was giving. So it's good for them. Yeah.
Brian Akers, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah. We're here to talk about this little book that you've just published, the Yoga Manifesto. And I'd like to hear a bit about your journey with yoga first. So,
Okay.
just to begin, like, what was your first introduction to yoga?
Yeah, actually, it was my mom who got me into yoga, and it was 1970. I was in the eighth grade, so it was like 54 years ago. And my mom was a little ahead of her time. She was into organic gardening and preventive health and all sorts of stuff going around in the 60s. So one day she brought back a book into the house called Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation by Jeff Stern.
Hmm.
And I picked it up and kind of rolled my eyes and I thought, oh, what crazy thing is mom into now? But as I started looking through the book, I thought, oh, this is kind of interesting. So I started practicing some of the asanas and I was trying to stand on my head and stretch and stuff. And my mom said that, they teach this down at the Y. There's a woman there, Janet Bouillon. She said, maybe you should just take a class. And I said, oh, okay. So I went down for an evening class and it was just me, this little 12-year-old boy with about 45 or 50 middle-aged women in leotards, all trying to stave off the ravages of time. And the teacher was very nice. She was an American woman who was married to a Indian, a researcher at the Upjohn Pharmaceutical Company. So I started taking classes, and then every time the classes were like 12, 15 weeks long, I'd sign up for the next one. So I took 5 years of yoga classes from eighth to 12th grade. And then when it's time to go to college, I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It's a real place. Everybody thinks it's fictional or mythical or something. It's in southwestern Michigan.
Hmm.
Uh, I went to the eastern half of the state for college at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And I saw that my degree had a foreign language requirement. So I was like looking through the list of languages, trying to pick a language. And I saw that they offered Sanskrit. And I had this kind of vague idea that Sanskrit and yoga were connected. So I started taking Sanskrit first semester, freshman year, no foreign language experience, very difficult.
Hmm.
And I studied 3 years of Sanskrit there. And then I spent my senior year in South India and studied Sanskrit and Telugu there. And then I came back and did 2 years of graduate school. Um, studied.
Let's slow down a bit.
Okay, sure.
You give me the whole story. I
Oh,
want some
sure.
detail. I want some details though.
Okay.
What kind of yoga was this woman teaching at the YMCA in Kalamazoo, Michigan back in 72 or whenever it was?
Yeah, she taught mostly what you'd call Shivananda yoga.
Mm.
Um, and to me, it was just yoga. Things weren't really very differentiated back then.
Yeah.
And then she would occasionally go to workshops and retreats and stuff. And so she went to one with Indra Devi, and she went to one with BKS Iyengar, and then she went to other ones too. But I guess what we were taught is what you would learn at like a Shivananda ashram or yoga center in one of the cities.
Right. So it's my understanding that in Shivananda they have like a set sequence that you learn.
Yeah, usually you start out with some preparatory stretching, which aren't really asanas or anything. You're just kind of stretching so you don't pull anything later. And then you would typically start with the Surya Namaskar, the sun salutation. And then you'd go through a few sets of asanas. So you'd have like a forward bending set and a backwards bending set, and then maybe a lateral rotation set. And then each set would have the corpse pose, Shavasana, in between each set.
Hmm.
So you might have like half a dozen sets, and they were all stationary poses, not like vinyasa where you'd kind of flow from one to the other. It was just kind of like one stationary pose after another.
Yeah, I guess other than the Surya Namaskar.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So, like, what was that like for you as a teenager, being the only one probably in your school or in your town practicing yoga? Did you feel like it was a strange thing that you were doing?
Well, it was is the for those 5 years doing it in junior high and high school. Eventually, there was some college age people came and joined the classes and so on. But I was definitely the only high school student, and it was sort of something I kept under my hat. I didn't really share it with people because back then, yoga was just the weirdest thing that you could imagine talking to somebody about. And so I didn't really tell a lot of people about it. It was just something I would do. I would come home from school and practice some after class, after the school day. And then typically like Monday night would be the class, and I'd go to the class. And so I didn't really tell a lot of people about it. I just kept it, I just did it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, she had a lot of students. She had hundreds, and then, eventually thousands of students,
Hmm.
but it was very under the radar. It was very kind of close to the keep it close to your chest kind of thing.
Hmm. And in the classes, were you kind of like a novelty, this kid who comes in and doing headstand and stuff?
I don't know. A couple times I got sort of glances like, what is this guy doing here? I had really long hair then, and so I was this little skinny kid with really long red hair. And the only times I really got attention is when I would do some asana that nobody else had ever done before, like bring my feet all the way over and rest them on the top of my head, like in the scorpion position or something. Everybody go like, "Wow, look at that!" But it was, I don't know. I just went to class, and everything seemed to work out okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So, uh, like, were you guys practicing those advanced asanas, like, forearm stands, scorpion pose, that kind of thing in that class, or was that something you were getting from the books and just trying out because you were young and limber?
yeah. It was something we practiced in class. She had in a beginner's class, and then I think she had an intermediate class, and then she had an advanced class. And the advanced class was just maybe 10 of us or something. And so we tried more difficult postures then.
Hmm.
So, yeah, God, you're kind of really jogging my memory. I haven't really thought about those classes for a long time. Yeah, that building now, the Y moved, and now it's like a law office.
Hmm.
It's like this old two-story brick building. Used to be a YWCA, and now it's a law office,
Hmm.
law
And
practice.
what were you guys using for yoga mats? Because there was no Lululemon, there was no Manduka, there was nobody making these kind of high-tech yoga mats. What were you guys
Yeah,
using?
I think the floor was carpeted,
Hmm.
and it was kind of an industrial carpeting, kind of, very, not a big shag carpet, which is typical in those days. So I think a lot of people just practice. Some people just practice that. A lot of us people just brought in a towel, like a beach towel. So we just practice on a beach towel.
Yeah. And was there any, I mean, I just got this picture in my head in the 1970s on this low pile industrial carpet and
Yeah,
people just
yeah.
with their
Practice on beach towels.
floral beach towels and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, just seems so wholesome.
Yeah,
Uh,
it was kind of wholesome actually.
yeah.
Yeah.
And was your teacher at that point talking about any of the history of yoga or the philosophy of yoga or like some like subtle body stuff, or were you just basically doing the practice?
She talked a little bit about that. Um, she was very she was very prim and proper. You know, she was uh, kind of when would she have been? I think she would have been born in the 19 late 1920s or early 1930s. So she was, you know, quite a bit. So she didn't really talk about that stuff too much, but she did try to create a good mood or a good atmosphere, kind of a contemplative atmosphere or a peaceful atmosphere like that. But she didn't really, she did take me up to the Shivananda ashram in northwest of Montreal. That's their
Hmm.
biggest one, Valmarin, Canada,
Yeah,
Quebec.
still there.
Still there, yeah, still
Yeah.
going. So I think around the summer of maybe between, I think I went with her twice. She took myself and a couple other students in a car. We just drove up and we stayed there for like a week each time in the summertime. So I did go up there and then see what it was like. And they had really full day meditations morning and evening, asanas morning and evening, lectures morning and evening. You had a little free time in the middle of the day. So chanting. So that was quite a different experience. So I went up for her with that, but she didn't really do very much of that
Hmm.
in her class.
The at the ashram, they had a guru in residence, didn't they?
Yeah, Swami Vishnu Devananda. He was one of Shivananda's direct pupils, direct disciples. Um, Shivananda, he's one of the two major figures in India. Shivananda is one, and then I forgot his name, it's slipping my mind. The guy who taught Iyengar and
Yeah,
Deshika. Yeah,
Krishnamacharya.
Krishnamacharya, that's it.
That's that's the lineage that I've learned and practiced in.
Yeah, and Krishnamacharya actually had more students. I think he had more. He created a bigger number of students eventually. But Shivananda was the other guy. He was up at Rishikesh in the Himalayas. Krishnamacharya was down in Mysore. And so Shivananda trained about half a dozen, maybe half a dozen to a dozen close students over a number of years. And they just kind of spread around the world. So Vishnu Devananda went to Canada. Sachidananda, who was at Woodstock, the Woodstock Music Festival in '69, he went to the United States, ended up in Virginia, I think. He sent somebody to Latin America, he sent somebody to Europe, and they just spread all over the place. So, and he sent them penniless, basically. So Vishnu Devananda just showed up in 58 or 59 in Canada with almost no money. And Shivananda told him, you know, your students are there, they are waiting for you. So just go find them. And he he started a little center in the city of Montreal. And then he bought some land. He found supporters and donors, bought some land outside of Montreal, like an hour, 45 minutes drive northwest. And then he cleared the land himself. I mean, he was out there with himself with an axe,
Hmm.
just clearing the land, building the buildings, teaching classes. And he had just an incredible amount of energy and enthusiasm and dedication and great laugh, great sense of humor. And he just built that whole thing up himself.
Wow.
And then he started opening different ones. So there's one in upstate New York, there's another one in California, there's one in Paradise Island in the Bahamas, there's several in India now, there's several in Europe. So he just started that whole thing.
Mm.
And
And
then he started teaching teacher training courses, and then those people would train other people, and it just kind of
yeah.
grew.
Yeah, I think it was like probably one of the first kind of structured 200-hour teacher trainings, like
Yeah,
made for Westerners, right?
yeah, I think so.
Hmm.
Um, at one point, yoga's kind of waxed and waned, but at one point in the mid 60s, they were just so swamped with people that they were just so happy that other gurus were starting to set up their own centers because they were just had more people than they could handle. Like you'd go there on the weekend, there might be 500 or 600 people, pitching tents and stuff. And it was
Wow.
just crazy. So I went and I actually did take his teacher training course um, between freshman and sophomore year of college. It was 6 weeks. He taught it himself. There were, I don't know, maybe 50 of us or something from all over the world. There were mostly Americans and Canadians, but there were people from bits of parts of India, parts of Europe. I mean, a handful of Israelis, one guy from Puerto Rico, one guy from Romania. I mean, there were people from all over the world
Hmm.
taking the course. So that was a lot of
And
fun.
yeah, what was it like for you as an American teenager meeting this Indian guru? Like, what was your impression of him? Other than, you
Um,
said he had a lot of energy in that, but
yeah,
what was
yeah.
that like meeting him?
It was it was pretty cool. And also I'm especially back then, I was like 17, 18. I was kind of shy. I wasn't going up and glad handing him, and actually nobody really did that. I mean, he was approachable and he would teach the cool one nice thing was on sunny days there was like a glade of trees and he would sit in a chair and then we'd all be kind of underneath the trees and sit and listen to him and taking notes and he'd be expounding on this or that, and it was just very beautiful, like a old forest academy,
Hmm.
from the ancient days in India. And so you'd be sitting there for hours, maybe 10, 12 feet away, and taking notes and listening to him and absorbing his personality. So it was uh, it was really something. You
Hmm.
know, um, it was you knew you were getting a very rare experience.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And what kind of texts were they teaching? Were they, because as far as I know, the Shivananda lineage, they're aren't they like ascetics? Like they wear saffron robes and shave their head and stuff, right?
yeah. They have swamis who are renunciates. They've renounced, kind of like a Jesuit. They've renounced sex, and I mean they're supposed to have. You always end up with
Right.
scandals, here and there. But that's what they're supposed to have done. They renounced sex and a vow of poverty, I think, and maybe a vow of obedience to the guru. I don't know. So those few people were wearing saffron robes, actually the same color as my book.
Mhm.
Um, and then you had a few other. You had a lot of staff members who were, they were just work. They were doing like karma yoga. They were keeping the whole thing running. And then all of us students were wearing. We had uniforms. We wore white trousers and yellow jackets, like yellow Nehru jackets. So the swamis were renunciates, and everybody else was. I think everybody else kind of cooled it while they were there, and tried to live a pure life as possible, and just concentrate on meditating and practicing yoga and eating vegetarian food and so on.
Mm. So were they teaching a lot from the Bhagavad Gita, or was it mainly yogic texts like Yoga Sutras or Hatha Yoga Pradipika?
Yeah, he that's when I first heard of the Pradipika, actually, because he was teaching from that, and he was also reading from the Bhagavad Gita, and I think he was also reading from the Yoga Sutras. And then he also had written his own book by that point called The Complete Illustrated Book of Yoga,
Mm.
um, which sold like 1 million copies in hardcover because it was like one of
Wow.
the very few books. Like that book and then Iyengar's Light on Yoga were the two most widely used book. Richard Hittleman too, back then.
Hmm.
Um, so he read from those, but he would just sit and talk spontaneously for half an hour, hour and a half, do demonstrations, help people with their poses, stuff like that.
Hmm.
So it was good.
Yeah, so you got some real like kind of one-on-one time with the guru. You could ask him questions about practice and things like that.
Yeah, it wasn't like he had like one-on-one individually, but there
Hmm.
was, you were with him all day, every day. So anytime you had a question, you could just ask a question. And he had a great sense of humor. It was very funny.
Hmm.
Tremendous amount of energy, huge amount of energy.
Hmm.
He'd start at 6 in the morning and going till 8, 9 o'clock at night. And that's a long time to be talking and teaching and demonstrating and correcting and stuff like that. So,
Yeah,
yeah, you're taking me back in time here.
yeah. Uh, and then so it's time for you to go to college. What was
Yeah.
your major where language was a requirement?
Yeah, well, that's a funny thing. I just started like a bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Arts degree,
Hmm.
and Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Science. They both required 2 years of a foreign language.
Hmm.
So what I did, which I don't think I could do, most people wouldn't do these days because college is now vastly more expensive, and the job market is more iffy and stuff. But back then, I would just every semester I would just open up the course catalog and try to find the most interesting courses I could find, whatever I felt like studying.
That sounds like the way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I did. And so eventually I just ended up with this potpourri of political science, history, anthropology, economics, Sanskrit, Telugu, Hindi Urdu, um, just this glob of stuff of whatever I felt like studying. And so in the 60s, they had started a new degree called the Bachelor of General Studies. It was kind of in response to student protests who felt they were too straitjacketed by the normal course of study. So they wanted something more freeform. So by the time I had finished this hodgepodge of courses, that was really the only one I could get without, studying for a fifth year. So that's what I did. Yeah.
Yeah, I took a Sanskrit course at the local university here some years back when I was
Uh-huh.
studying Vedic chanting,
Uh-huh.
and I found it a little frustrating because we talked a lot about grammar and reading
Yeah.
Devanagari, but nobody knew how to pronounce anything. And
Oh,
here I was coming from like the oral tradition and
you
wanting
wanted
to
to
just
have
learn
it.
how to read and all that,
Yeah.
but pronunciation came first because it was oral tradition as far as I understood.
Yeah.
So I had these professors who, when I asked them about pronunciation of certain chants or whatever, they were kind of like in the dark about it. What was it
Ah.
like when you were doing it?
Um, like in Ann Arbor when I was studying Sanskrit.
Yeah, like was it
Yeah.
spoken Sanskrit or just like reading and grammar?
No, we would speak it. The That's a funny thing too. I had a great professor. His name was Deshpande, Madhav Deshpande, and
Hmm, so
he'd
he was an
open
Indian guy.
Indian guy, yeah, from
Hmm.
Western India, Pune, and it was only his, I think, maybe third year on the faculty, and I was just a freshman. So it was like we were both trying to figure out how did we actually do this.
Yeah.
Um, but he,
How to approach Sanskrit for Westerners? I mean,
yeah,
where do you
exactly.
begin?
So, yeah, where to begin, how to do it. So, but the funny thing about it is the pronunciation of Sanskrit varies according to what that speaker's mother tongue is,
Hmm.
and they all think it's the best. So if you ask a Marathi speaker, he'll say, just kind of confidentially, really Marathi speakers have the best Sanskrit pronunciation. And if you ask a Telugu speaker, a teacher, he'll say, well, really Telugu speakers have the best Sanskrit pronunciation. So there's a fair amount of variation. So I initially learned like Marathi pronunciation, and then when I went to India, I learned Telugu pronunciation.
Mm.
But yeah, we did speak it, and especially in India, I did 3 years in Ann Arbor and then 1 year in South India. And 1 year that guy in South India, the professor there, we always had to recite without looking at our notes. or anything written down, we had to recite out loud the previous day's lesson
Hmm.
because he wanted to know that if we really absorbed it or not. So there was a huge amount of memorization studying in India. And so we'd start every class just reciting the previous day's lesson or maybe the whole week's lesson. Sometimes we'd pick a different starting point and we'd have to go back and recite everything we'd learned for the whole week before we go on to something new.
Wow.
So that was really stretches your memory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what were they using when you went to India? What were they using to learn? Was it yogic texts or Vedas or what?
Yeah. So the in India, I was by that time I'd already studied 3 years. So myself and my co-student, we studied one of the classical grammars of India called Ashtadhyayi. It was by this scholar named Panini, and it was written about 2,000 years ago. So we studied three sections out of that. So there was no textbook. It was just memorizing and reciting, and then analyzing, going through those sutras. And we also spent a lot of time creating and then reciting verb conjugations, which is,
I remember doing that, man.
yeah, verb conjugations. So we did that. And then I also, just with him, I did my first pass at translating the Hatha Yoga Pradipika.
Hmm.
So I did that. And then my fellow student translated a different book, another small book.
So you were translated from Devanagari
Yeah,
into English. So,
into English. Yeah,
uh-huh.
yeah.
And you weren't, were you referencing any previously done translations and comparing and trying to find something that was a little more accurate or something?
Yeah. In fact, the the only books I found that I could get my hands on were books that had both the Sanskrit and the English translation. So I found like one translation from the Adyar Library down in Madras, the Theosophical Society. That was actually quite a good translation. And then there was one, another well-known one published by Motilal, I think, or Moonshiram. Anyway, Pancham Sin. He, I looked at that one too, and that one had a lot of typos, which made it difficult. That book had like 400 or 500 typos in the Sanskrit.
Hmm.
So, and when you're just learning, that's quite a significant obstacle because you think, God, I can't get this word. I mean, is this what word is this? What form is this? Is this an instrumental? Is this a dative? What's going on here? And then you find out it's just a typo. So that can really slow you down. So I translated with the teacher there, and then that Theosophical edition also had a commentary, which I think was from the 19th century AD by Brahmananda. So he would sort of explain things that he would explain. There'd be a verse and there'd be like a paragraph of prose, little short sentences. And what I learned about commentaries is if something is very straightforward, they're very happy to comment on it. And then if it's not so quite straightforward, they'll write less about it. And then if something is really baffling, I mean, like really baffling, the commentator might not write anything at all. So,
Right. Yeah. Or they'll
so it's
say things
inverse to what you
like,
need.
or they'll say like, this isn't relevant to today's people or something. They'll
Yeah,
just kind
yeah,
of write it
yeah,
off. Yeah.
yeah. So the commentaries can be helpful, but they can also just be just as opaque as the original text.
Right. And they can often be very influenced by the person doing the commentating on their own religious views or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you
Social
notice things
standing.
like that in funny ways. Like I remember the Ramakrishna mission. They did a number of very good editions of the Upanishads and stuff like that. And I remember there was one text. It had a couple verses that dealt with sex or something like that. So they were in the Sanskrit text. They printed it, but then in the translation, completely deleted, completely missing. They didn't say anything about it. It was just like it wasn't even there.
Well,
I
that's
just
funny
figured,
that they would include the Sanskrit thinking that, well, no one's going to actually be able to read this, so they won't know that
yeah,
we're not talking about this part of it, but
right.
like respectful enough of the text to still include it in the Sanskrit.
Right, exactly. And then they figured if anybody learned enough Sanskrit to read the Sanskrit version, they deserve to read it. They'd earn the right to read it. So there's all sorts of peculiar things like that in Sanskrit studies.
Hey, I want to take a moment to speak with you about this channel. Currently, only 11% of viewers are subscribed to the channel. I think those numbers are terrible. So if you're enjoying this content and you want to help out the channel, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe. And if you really want to help out the channel, you can become a member of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon, which will give you access to early release of full ad-free episodes, plus access to the archive of the first 100 episodes of this podcast. It would really help me out and allow me to keep creating content like the interview that you're watching right now. Okay, thanks so much. Now, back to the interview. So, when you're studying in India, what was that like for you? Were you staying, like, were you billeting at a local home or were you staying in dorms or
Oh,
something?
yeah. Well, that was something. I just barely survived. Really. So I went over on the University of Wisconsin College Year in India program. And what they did, it ran for decades, I think it's still running, is every summer, about 2 dozen students would gather in Madison, Wisconsin. And maybe a dozen of them would study Hindi, and they'd go and spend the year in Benares. And maybe half a dozen would study Tamil, and they'd spend the year in Madurai. And then about half a dozen would study Telugu, and they would spend the year in Vishakhapatnam, which is where I went. And the reason I went there, I didn't really have any particular interest in Telugu, but they had found a good Sanskrit professor there. So anybody that wanted to study Sanskrit, they sent to Vishakhapatnam and studied Sanskrit there. So we went there, and myself and the other Sanskrit student, we shared with this other student. We rented the bottom floor of a house. A couple guys rented the bottom floor of a different house, and then the three women stayed in like a little hostel, um, sort of like a hostel thing, and they would go down and have their meals prepared. Um, and then just every day we'd walk to class and walk back, and it was quite something because a university in India in the 1970s was not that far removed from the colonial era. In fact, the university I was at, Andhra University, was founded by the British in 1927. So we were still going to these colonial era buildings,
Hmm.
um, and what is there to say about it? So, like the classrooms, instead of a blackboard, would actually have wood painted black. So, like pieces of pine wood, just painted black. It wasn't slate or anything, it was just wood. And so they'd use chalk for that. And then in each department, the only person that had a telephone, a landline telephone, was the chairman of the department. So that was like a sign of his status. Like he was the only person in the whole department that had a telephone. And then in the whole university, the only person that had a car, an automobile, was the vice chancellor, the guy who ran the entire university. So he was the only person in the university that had an automobile at his disposal. So everybody else was either riding motor scooters or motorcycles or bicycles or just walking and taking the bus and stuff. So it was a real long time ago. It's before, not only is it before the internet and cell phones and stuff, but it's before personal computers. It was really just all paper and pencil and stuff, and one telephone per department. So that was like a trip and a half, just
Hmm.
going back to something that basic. And then I got malaria twice,
Hmm.
and so I was like popping chloroquine tablets like they were, Skittles or something. And then at around Christmas time, the winter break, I took a little trip around South India, and I got amoebic dysentery. And that finally hit me when I got back to Vizag, and I spent like 2.5 weeks in a hospital, a Catholic hospital there. And I was down to 98 pounds because I just lost like almost all the weight. The doctor was like, I don't know if this guy's going to make it through or not. So I
Wow.
got down to like 98 pounds. So that's kind of what, and then I was taking, and then the Sanskrit professor was like a real taskmaster. So I'm just like trying to stay alive. And he's given us like 4 hours of class a day and then like another 4 hours of homework every night. So it was pretty grueling. I mean, it was quite an experience to go through.
Hmm.
Um, Whereas I would say like the yoga camp up in Canada for the teacher training course, that was just wonderful and fantastical and marvelous and far out and stuff. The year in India had aspects of like a baton death march to it. It was really quite a lot to go through. On the plus side, I did learn a lot of Sanskrit, and also like we had a cook in our household. It was a widow. Her husband was in the Indian Army, so she had lived all over in different parts of India. So she spoke like 9 different languages to some extent. Every time her husband got reassigned, she'd go and learn a new language. And so, but fortunately, one of the languages wasn't English. English wasn't one of the languages. So, so we could only speak to her in Telugu. So that was like just to be able to eat every day and buy groceries and all that stuff was all done in Telugu.
Hmm. Um,
Um, yeah,
uh,
go ahead.
yeah. I mean, you're there for a year. You're a young
Yeah,
guy.
yeah,
At any point, did you think like, screw this, I gotta go home. Like, I'm gonna die if I stay here.
yeah. A more sensible person would have thought that. Um, or you could say a less dedicated person, but maybe a more sensible person would have thought that. Um, I I never got quite to that point. There was another guy in Madurai who was really sick too. He had bad asthma, and there was a lot of dust in India. So like he spent, what did he do? I think he spent a month in an oxygen tent because he just needed the break from the dust and stuff. And every year there's like 1 or 2 people that have like a really hard time dealing with India one way or another. But I don't know. I didn't quit. I kept going. I guess I was thinking, geez, I don't want to lose my course credits and have to, when you're a kid or when you're young, you go through a lot of stuff that you wouldn't go through today.
Hmm. Yeah.
When you're older, you're thinking, I wouldn't go through that again. But when you're a kid, you're just like, let's complete the mission. Let's do it.
Yeah, it's like it's like a blend of like naivete and resiliency. Like you can kind of put up with a lot more, you recover faster, whatever, but
Yeah.
you also like don't know any better, so it gives you a kind of a dumb courage or something.
Yeah, and also you're just kind of obedient. You're used to listening to
Mm.
teachers, listening to parents. You're just sort of used to listening to authority figures. So if they tell you, "Oh, you're going to be okay," okay, I'll just live through this.
Hmm. So
Um,
you've got this yoga practice, you're
mhm.
studying these Sanskrit texts
Yeah.
that contain a lot of Indian philosophy and worldview. Is this shaping your worldview as an American kid? Or is it purely academic for you?
No, no, it's not purely academic. It is shaping you, but it's also hard to sum up. Well, one thing is like when you get that sick, you're just sort of absorbing it in your bones. It's like something you're living through. It's something you're experiencing. It's not just like a theoretical thing like, oh, you could get ill, like that. So some of it is just you're living and you're going through it. Um, and then That's a hard question. No, definitely it was yoga for me. It's been spiritual practicing. It's also been academic. And then a few decades later, when I started my little publishing company, is also partly commercial. So it's partly a way to make a tiny living. It's partly my own spiritual quest and journey. And partly it's all my own like intellectual trying to understand, why are things the way they are? And how do you speak this language? How do you read that language? Why is the political economy the way it is? Why are international relations the way they are? So it's an all encompassing thing. What I've learned, I don't know. I've tried my best.
Hmm. Well, how did yoga help you make sense of the world, like in that spiritual sense?
I would say that life always has a lot of up and downs. People die, you go through difficult things, you go through difficult personal things, you go through difficult financial or career things. You go through a lot. And so yoga has always given me a means for coping with all that. It's been like a refuge. It's always been a calm place to be. I guess you could say that.
Hmm.
It's always been an interesting thing too. There's always more to learn. I've never felt like, wow, I'm enlightened or wow, I've reached the highest level. I'm always thinking, I still have a long way to go. I still have many more things to learn, more things to experience with it. So you don't get bored
Hmm.
with it. I could say that. Yeah.
Hmm.
What do you
Yeah.
think?
What do I think about yoga?
For
Like what it's
you?
given me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many levels to it for me. Like on one level, it's kind of daily maintenance.
Yeah.
It helps keep my body more flexible and strong in different ways, like more resilient body. I think it
Yeah.
keeps me healthy. I don't get sick, really.
Yeah.
Um, I think it helps to restore a traumatized nervous system. And
Yeah.
so return you to what I think of as like a kind of a natural state of resiliency
Yeah.
for the nervous system. So
Yeah.
if you are triggered, like if your nervous system is activated, it returns to a baseline much more quickly.
Yeah.
And I think that has to do with a lot of the breathing and moving practices that I do. It's just like little micro stresses on the nervous system and then return to like an equilibrium or
Yeah.
baseline.
Yeah. I agree
And
with
then
all that.
yeah, and then I think that helps to clarify the mind.
Yeah.
So you can think more clearly, less intrusive thoughts, less, like it doesn't feel like my mind's out of control ever. I have all of
Mm.
these tools to go to quiet my mind if it is
Hmm. Hmm.
too active. And then it has this ability because the practice that I learned through that Desikachar Krishnamacharya tradition, where it is
Hmm.
combining breath with movement in this very specific, precise, and intimate
Yeah.
way, it opens me up. Like the spirituality for me is very tangible in that way. I feel
Mm.
like the life force, and I'm
Mm.
working with the life force to help it move through me and function in me in a more kind of natural, easy way. So it's not about connecting to a deity or anything like that. For me, it's about connecting to life and participating in it. And so, and it just keeps opening up in different ways. It's like you said, it just it never ends. This kind of
Yeah.
exploration through practice.
I'm glad I asked because I think the listeners, the viewers of this video are going to find your explanation a lot more cogent than what I was giving. So it's good for them. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I've done a lot of teaching, so I've thought a lot
Uh,
about how to articulate or express some of what yoga's given me, and what I think it can give to other people.
yeah.
Particularly like Westerners who are raised in a secular household,
Yeah.
who are looking for a spiritual connection that doesn't require them to take on another culture's beliefs.
Hmm.
It's like yoga to me is like a technology, like a shamanic technology to connect to the forces of nature,
Mm.
basically.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely there. I mean, the religious stuff is all like yoga is such a big encompassing term.
Yeah.
There is the kind of the hatha connecting to nature, about health and strength and longevity, that kind of like very kind of practical stuff.
Hmm.
There's the nature worship aspect that comes in through the Vedas. And then, there's all the Brahmanic deity focused stuff that's been incorporated into it. So it's
Yeah.
it's really hard to say one thing about yoga, like yoga is about this or yoga is for this.
Yeah.
There's so much, and so it's been super helpful for me to like find a lineage that resonated with me, that I could align to, that was kind of adapted for a more universal approach.
Yeah.
Because Krishnamacharya was a Brahmin, but Desgachar was a secular modern Indian guy who
Mm.
wasn't interested in religion. And so he was thinking about, well, what does this do for our mind and our body? And a lot of the mantras that he gave to people were the nature focused ones that didn't
Mm.
involve Hindu deity.
Hmm.
And so I really appreciate that. Like yoga is like a universal technology for mind,
Yeah.
body, spirit.
Yeah. 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 And it's got 2.5 millennia of practices built up. So, I
Yeah.
mean, rich treasure trove of, nature and your body and deities and meditation. I mean, there's like a huge amount of stuff in every category that you can think of that you can learn about.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, and I always say like one of the things is like it's still it's still living. And so these techniques are tried, tested, and true. I mean, more than anything else I found, other than maybe in a Chinese system,
Hmm.
which has that same kind of like it's got a lot of breath to it. It can get very specific about certain things, but it's been around a long time. It's kind of systematized. You can learn it. There's a clarity to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yoga for me, it's like yoga and qigong, tai chi, traditional Chinese medicine,
Mm.
very similar. And I just tell people like it just depends on like what kind of flavors you like. Like,
Yeah.
do you like Indian food or do you like Chinese food? Because that's
Uh-huh.
basically what it's about. But they're both
Yeah.
very kind of complete technological systems for the human person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's astonishing. I mean, yoga goes all the way back to the really beginning of recorded history, and it's vibrant and alive today more than ever.
Mhm.
It's quite astonishing when you think about it.
Yeah, totally. And how
Yeah.
it has become like a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
Like it really is universal.
Oh, yeah. I shipped a complete set of books to Borneo. I mean, somebody in
Borneo.
Borneo ordered a set of books. I was like, wow, Borneo. So I was like, yoga really is everywhere. So
What an amazing thought that there's
yeah,
somebody in the jungles of Borneo learning and practicing yoga. I
yeah.
wonder, do you know if they were an expat or if they were a native?
Oh, I don't remember the name.
Hmm.
I don't remember what the name was. So can't answer that. But also, like Amazon now has like 2 dozen different Amazons all over the world, and my books sell in all of them. Almost all of them will have some sales. So, Brazil, Japan, everywhere.
hmm So after college, you got into publishing
Yeah,
and you had a whole career doing non-yoga related publishing stuff.
that's true. Yeah. I Let me see. I finished my 6th year at Ann Arbor, and I was a little burned out. And as you probably know, there's been a surplus of PhDs for like almost half a century now. And the graduate schools just keep churning out more PhDs than there are jobs for them. So that was starting even back then. So it didn't really seem viable to try to get a PhD and get a teaching job someplace. So I
Especially
found,
in Sanskrit.
or yeah, especially
Not
almost
a
in,
lot of demand.
Yeah, not a lot of demand, and anthropology, history, any of those types of fields, the stuff that I was really interested in. So unemployment was really high in Michigan. It was 17% statewide. So I
Mm,
said, well, maybe I should just go out to California and do something with computers. They seem to be the coming thing. So in 81, I moved out to the Bay Area and I spent 10 years there, working with book publishers and pre-press and advertising and graphic arts, the whole schmear, everything having to do with printing, typesetting, design, computers, that whole stuff.
hmm
So I did learn a lot. I enjoyed the craft of it. I didn't really like being an employee, but
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking my language. I
yeah.
also was a graphic designer and book
Oh,
designer and typographer,
oh,
and it ended up that yeah, I just hated working for other people basically, and so I only
yeah.
lasted about maybe 12 years in that before I went
Oh, that's about the
freelance.
same.
Mm,
Yeah. I think the book publishing people were better people to hang out with, but the pay wasn't very good.
mhm.
And the advertising people, the pay was a lot better, but they're kind of a lot of nasty people in advertising. Um,
Yeah,
so
I concur on both fronts.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Rather,
yeah.
I always had more fun doing like big art books
Uh,
for the Toronto Museum and things like that.
oh,
The advertising work, like you said, you could make a lot more money, but it was like going into the snake pit.
yeah. And you had to deliver no matter what. I
Yeah.
mean, if there was a power failure I was in California when one of the big earthquakes hit. I think it was 89, the Loma Prieta earthquake. And it totally shut down the city. And like the next day, I got a call at home, one of the clients asking when their work was going to be finished. I said, we don't even have power. you know, it's
I
like,
know.
why are you calling me at home?
I had the same thing. Some of the last straws for me were like days where I was either sick or a big snowstorm in Toronto, and I was
Yeah.
calling in to say, yeah, I was even willing to work from home because the internet was up and running by that point, and
Mhm.
I got so much flack for that for not showing up at the office and doing my
Yeah.
10 hours or
Yeah.
and if it was a weekend, you weren't a team player unless you showed up and pitched in with everybody and. They just wanted like your soul, man.
Yeah, and but they were under a lot of pressure too. We had one client at one of the places I worked where one of the things they did was full page ads for the New York Times, uh, and they had to send them out. FedEx. They're still using FedEx. It was before, so they had to have those. They had already paid like $60,000 to reserve that space, and they had to pay that whether they got the material to the New York Times or not. So they were like, look, we've already spent $60,000 on this space. You have to deliver no matter what. And
Hmm
so it's like, I understand. I have to deliver no matter what. And
Yeah.
so you did. But
At, at any point, did you think about like kind of combining your interests and going to work in the graphic design department of Yoga Journal or something?
uh, you know, I I didn't think of I didn't think of that actually. Um, the Yoga Journal was way back when I was there. It was like almost like a amateur publication. It wasn't glossy and thick and full of ads and stuff. It was more like a just more like a home done publication, I would say.
Hmm
So I kept the two fields separate, but I was thinking about starting a book publishing company. And I always had in the back of my mind, I had this translation of the Pradipika. So I was thinking, I could start with that and then expand from there. But the whole time I was in California, I was kind of like a fish out of water and a bird of passage simultaneously. I was just out there doing the computer stuff,
hmm
and so I was thinking about combining them, but not at that time.
Now, throughout this time period, are you still keeping up on your yoga practice at home?
Yeah, as much as I could. I was doing it on weekends and then usually 1 or 2 days during the week. But a lot of times you just come home and you're beaten like a dog,
Hmm. That's
come
why you
home
do
and
it first thing in the morning. Come on.
yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah.
Okay, so
So
it's there, but it's kind of simmering on the back
yeah,
burner.
it's
It's
kind
not
of
such
summary.
a
I did
focus.
I did keep collecting books. They had up on if you're familiar with Berkeley, I lived in Berkeley the whole time. I
Hmm.
worked in Berkeley or in San Francisco or in Oakland or something, but I lived in Berkeley, and there was a couple of really good bookstores there. One was called Cody's Books, which is gone, new bookstore, and then right next door there's a huge four-story used bookstore called Moe's Books, which is still there. So all the time I was in California, I was still buying books about Indian history, Indian culture, Indian philosophy. So I was kind of building up my library and practicing yoga when I could, and then doing my typesetting and other stuff like that because I had to.
Hmm. So when
Yeah.
did you take the leap into publishing that first book?
Oh, well, that was one of those things of fate. I hadn't had a vacation for a really, really long time. So I decided to go on an eclipse cruise, a solar eclipse cruise. And this would have been in 91. So I flew down from the Bay Area down to Los Angeles, rendezvoused with a couple friends from high school. And then we took a 1 week cruise down the western coast of Mexico. And we made a couple stops. And we also saw the solar eclipse, the total solar eclipse from on board the ship. And when we were in port at Cabo San Lucas, I was standing on one of the decks, just leaning over the rail, looking over the town and the sunset. And I looked down, and there's this interesting woman, like about 10 feet away. So, fate, kismet, karma, who knows what. Um, I struck up a conversation with her, which is not really my way. Usually I'm more, closed in. But struck up a conversation with her, seduced her, spent spent the rest of the cruise with her. She lived in the Hudson Valley in Woodstock. She went back to New York. I went back to Berkeley. We talked on the phone. I dropped everything, moved out here, and we got married on the shore of a lake 3 months to the day after we met.
Wow.
So then I came out here. She had a gift shop. I was helping her a bit. I was writing science fiction a bit, something I always wanted to do. And then in the mid 90s, I started resuming my study of Sanskrit. And then I said, well, I'm going to do a fresh, I'm going to revisit my translation, which is really good because my first pass at it was not very good. And then I said, I'm going to use this to start a publishing company. So I did that. And 2001, formally registered the business. 2002, my translation of the Pradipika came out. And then people started buying it.
Hmm.
Uh, there was another translation, big, thick, brown one by Mukti Bodhananda from the Bihar School of Yoga. That
Hmm.
wasn't really it beat me to market by a year or two, but it wasn't widely available in the U.S. There was just enough room for me to wiggle in there. And so then I said, well, let me get some other people to translate some. So I contacted James Mallinson, and he translated the Geiranda Samhita and the Shiva Samhita. And then I ran across this guy, Lars Martin Fosse. He's a new Sanskrit, but he's also a professional translator, lives in Norway. So I asked him to do the Bhagavad Gita and the Kama Sutra. Kama Sutra really isn't a yoga text, but it has a couple interesting asanas, you could say. And I thought
Hmm.
I wanted to do it because it was just one of the most famous books in the world, notorious. And I looked at the translations, and they weren't really very good. So I thought, let me do that. And so those guys did a few books, and then I came out with ebook versions of all those. And then I didn't bring out any new stuff for a while. I was spending a long time just trying to get the business completely up to snuff, like rewrite the websites in the current style, and get all organized with um, Facebook and Amazon and stuff like that. And then I just this year I wrote this book. Oh well, I guess I should say I have this collection of translations now, and I thought I should really do like a reader's guide or a companion volume or something that will sort of explain these other translations and put them in some kind of context. So so I thought, well, maybe I'll just do like a history of yoga or something like that. And
Mhm.
then I started getting ideas, and then I thought, well, I'll start writing these ideas down. And then I said, well, this is really kind of more like a manifesto. So I gathered all my thoughts and wrote this little tiny book, and it became the Yoga Manifesto, which I'm trying to let people know about. So I'm
Mhm.
very happy that you're talking to me now.
Yeah, I mean, it's so refreshing to me, like something that has a kind of sense of humor about it, that's not coming from a scholarly, authoritative place, not trying to convince you of anything. It's basically your summation of what yoga is, where it comes from, what it's good for, where it might lead, that kind of thing. And so I find that's like fun and refreshing. And you
Oh,
have a
good.
really great writing style, very
Thank you.
direct, to the point, with a little sense of humor. Um, yeah, and I wonder if that comes from your sci-fi writing, because it does remind me of some of the old sci-fi writers. Very kind of economic style.
Yeah, short stories. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
very concise.
yeah,
Well, if I was born in a previous life in India, I was probably a sutra writer,
yeah.
really
Right. That's
super
kind of the style
condensed.
of the sutra. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, I like to be concise and pithy and funny, and um, rather than being, so many books are bloated and
Mm-hmm.
they're just like, oh my God, why didn't anybody edit this thing?
Because they got to be at least 200 pages so they fit on the bookseller shelf and they sell
Yeah,
paper.
yeah, yeah.
I'm a big fan of little books. I wrote a
Oh,
little
good.
book and self-published it on yoga and plant medicine, and it's
Uh-huh.
like 112 pages.
Uh-huh.
And I'm about to do another one that's just over 100 pages too. I like these small little like pocket books.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
I like that. I don't know if you've seen them. Oxford University Press has this big, massive set of books called the Very Short Introductions. And they have like 800 titles, and all of them are about 100 pages. And very short introduction to just about anything you can imagine. And it's really good if you want to know something about a subject, don't really know much about it. You can get a really up to date introduction. Most of them have been published in the last 5 or 6 years.
Hmm.
So it's really, I read it like two or three dozen of them for this book.
Hmm. So you started out, you wanted to, as a publisher, provide some sort of introduction to yoga, to give some context for all these kind of scholarly texts that you've released, and you
Yeah,
end up with this very personal kind of yoga manifesto.
yeah.
What are you hoping that the manifesto does for people? Like, is it about helping people clarify what yoga is about? Is it about like kind of opening it and helping people to realize that there's something in yoga for them that could be beneficial, or
Well,
what?
I wanted people to have some sort of framework or context to think about yoga. I wanted them to realize that yoga goes back at least 25 centuries. It might go back further than 25 centuries, but we just don't have any real evidence that it does. It could be go
Yeah,
back
it's all
30 centuries.
speculation, but there's some like
Yeah,
pretty compelling
yeah.
evidence, of
Could go,
postures being practiced and all of that.
yeah. It could go back 30 centuries. And I mean, it could go back 35
Hmm.
centuries. We just don't know. So it's something very old. And then I thought it was just amazing how in the last 50, 75 years, how it's become so popular. Something so old has become so popular. And it did it without any state support. And it didn't like it was. It didn't have. any institutional support. It wasn't required reading at a university, or it wasn't a church that was pushing it, or it wasn't the federal government or provincial governments or
Yeah.
city
Yeah.
governments. It
You're
just
right. It
sprung
was
up.
all grassroots,
Yeah,
underground. Yeah.
yeah, and word of mouth. So
Hmm.
I thought all of those things were really quite remarkable, and probably things people didn't really fully realize.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that a lot of people don't know about is the kind of the militarized yogis. Back in
Yeah,
the day when the Muslim hordes were attacking India,
yeah,
like the yogis took up arms and they're kind of like a samurai class.
yeah, and they're fighting the British. They're fighting everybody, and uh, and those armies still exist. They're not
Hmm.
actively fighting, but James Madison actually was given the rank of commander in one of these yogi armies. So when he goes to when he goes to the Kumbh Mela,
Kumbh
like every
Mela,
12
yeah.
years,
Hmm.
when he goes there, these armies are there, and they're like
Like a reserve army
yeah,
of
like reserve
yogis.
army, but they're like collecting rupees from householders and stuff. And then every once in a while they'd come by and give him his cut. As a commander, he'd get his cut. And so he's there and he's just building up this fat wad of rupees.
So, hey, it sounds like a bit of a grift.
Yeah. So and I at the end of the book I say, like if civilization really falls apart for who knows what reason, pandemic, nuclear exchange, global warming, if things really fall apart and we go back to like a medieval lifestyle, yoga's been there before and it's
Hmm.
still in our DNA. We can survive a medieval period because we've done it. If we really had to militarize, maybe we could do that again. Who knows? If we
Yeah.
need
Or aside from militarization,
yeah,
just survive and thrive outside of the systems that we rely on now, like the healthcare
yeah,
system and things like that. Like
yeah,
you could say, I mean, maybe I think it's probably very possible that yoga emerged in the medieval era,
mhm,
and the people who practiced it were poor.
yeah,
Wasn't until later that got kind of taken up by the Brahmin classes, right? Kind of like co-opted by them.
yeah,
But I think it's like a real DIY technology to help people survive and thrive with very little.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so, people learn a yoga practice, it's going to help them through, like you said at the very beginning, all those ups and downs of life. And I would say
yeah,
the ups and downs of our society at large, too.
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, we just elected a madman like last week here in the United States.
Well, I've been thinking about my yoga practice a lot, actually, like watching what's going down and all of the
Yeah,
polarization that's happening. I
yeah,
think it's probably, it's maybe just my character or whatever, but I think the yoga helps me maintain a equanimity and not
yeah,
feeling the need to identify with one side or the other. Because
yeah,
at the end of the day, like you could say one of the purposes of yoga is to disidentify with the ego, with your nationality, all of those other things. And I think yoga, because of the way it affects our nervous system and our mind, helps us to do that, to like, yeah, not take sides, to
yeah,
find this middle path and
yeah,
stay out of the dramas, because we know the dramas just create more suffering,
yeah,
more vrittis in the chitta.
yeah, 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 yeah. There could be a lot coming.
Yeah, well, there's a lot going on now. I mean, it's happening. It's all happening.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, so that's what struck me about. Well, that was actually one of my first ideas. I was driving from Woodstock into my wife and I were driving from Woodstock into Kingston, which is the nearest large city, like 30,000 people. Woodstock's only like 3 or 4 thousand people. It's just a little village, little
Hmm.
town. And we were driving along and we were headed into the place, headed into Kingston. And we stop at a stoplight in the country, we stop at a stoplight. And I said, yoga works either way. And my wife looks at me, she says, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, yoga helps people deal with modernity, the stress, the time pressures, everything like that. So if modernity continues, yoga helps you cope with all that. And then, like, if all of this falls apart, all you need is just a little tiny bit of space, a little flat space. And yoga can help you cope with the loss of modernity, coping with the collapse of modernity. So I'm thinking like yoga works either way, whether things go great, whether things just are catastrophe, yoga still works. And then the light turned green and we kept on going. And then I said, I got to write that down. So I wrote
No,
it down and then I started writing more stuff down. Eventually I got a book.
yeah, I think that's great. However things go,
We'll
yoga
be okay.
works. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great place to end our conversation. I mean, it
Okay.
kind of is a great answer to the first questions you ask in the book is like, why yoga? Why now?
Yeah.
Because yoga works either way. However
Yeah.
things go, it's going to help.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so.
That's great.
Yeah.
So Yoga Vidya is the best place for people to go to check out the different editions and to get Yoga Manifesto.
Yeah. Will you put a link up or something when
Yep.
you put this up? Okay. Yep. There's links to retailers all around the world. You can order directly from us also. Um, if you're in Canada, probably the cheapest thing to do is get an ebook.
Mhm.
Then you don't have all the shipping stuff. But anyway, we'll get a copy to you no matter how. If we can ship to Borneo, we can ship to Canada.
Yeah. And well, just curious, do you have any texts that you're looking to release in the future? Any new
Well,
translations or anything?
yeah, we have one gaping hole, which is we don't have an edition of the Yoga Sutras.
Mhm.
So that might be our next book. But on the other hand, there's already plenty of editions of those out, plenty of different copies of the Yoga Sutras. So
Right. Unless you
that
had
might be,
something like really unique to add to
yeah,
the canon, why bother,
yeah,
right? Hmm.
yeah. So that might be the next book. Um, if enough people read this manifesto and send me questions and talk about it, if it generates enough discussion, maybe that'll generate grist for another book. Maybe not.
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm 66. I'm slowing down. So I'm not revving up the engine trying to get a book out every year or anything like that. So
I appreciate it. That's kind of like the yogi lifestyle, like in a way. It's like I want to work hard enough to make a decent enough living so that I can do my yoga, live comfortably, enjoy my life. But it's not all
yeah,
about the work. You want to preserve your life energy and
right,
live a full life.
right.
Yeah. So we
Yeah,
end
that's
up
about,
living in these quiet little villages, doing our thing, and
yeah,
not trying to be, I don't know, traveling all around the world and all of that stuff. Just seems kind of antithetical to what it means to be a yogi.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. In fact, the texts say don't travel, avoid the company of people, don't travel. Avoid spicy food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah, I'm always suspicious of the international yoga teachers flying all around the world,
yeah,
leaving a huge
flying.
carbon footprint and probably depleting their prana wherever they
Yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah. Those gurus, you have to keep an eye on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it. I think you're probably very similar in this way. I think like you spend enough time with a good teacher to learn how to practice on your own, and then
Mhm.
you leave them.
Yeah,
Don't bother sticking around, learn the practice, and then learn through the doing of the practice, I think is the
yeah,
best way.
yeah. Well, at some point, you just feel like you're done. You know.
Yeah. Well, hopefully. I mean, some people never get to that point, and the guru kind of like has the carrot on the end of the stick, the
Mm,
enlightenment carrot on the
mm.
end of an ever lengthening stick, always just out of reach.
Oh, well, you can't live on just one Rolls Royce. You got to have at least a dozen.
Yeah, or 99, like Osho, my man, was on my shirt because
Uh-huh.
as UG Krishnamurti said, Osho was the biggest pimp there ever was.
99. Wow.
Well, he
Oh
did it to
boy.
prove a point, He wasn't
Uh-huh.
doing it to show off.
Uh-huh.
It was, he was kind of like putting a mirror up for the Americans who are so
Uh-huh.
kind of greedy spiritually and materially, just to
Yeah.
show them, how
Yeah.
ridiculous it is.
Yeah. Well, I think as time goes on, people are getting more and more mature and more sophisticated and more savvy about how this business works. And that should hopefully keep them from being taken advantage of or, joining crazy cults or something like that. I hope. We'll see.
Well, I don't know. Politics are the new religion, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, man. It's been really fun talking with you. I appreciate your
Yeah. Great. I hope everybody finds it worthwhile. It was really great talking with you. Thanks for reaching out to me. And if there's anything I can do for you, just let me know.
Cool. All right. Take care.
Okay.
Talk
Bye
soon.
bye.
Bye.